Hi friends, Alex Jones here with key breaking news. It is April 18th, 2011. I told you more than 2 months ago, when this whole Libya situation kicked off, that NATO and the UN were planning to get us involved in another war and were preparing ground troops to invade Libya. When the UN passed their resolution, within 36 hours, President Obama had followed their orders, not consulted Congress, and launched a war, an air war against Libya. And when the public pointed out that you've got to get congressional approval under the Constitution to do that, or we might as well just have a Caesar or a Fuhrer, Obama's people came out and said, it's kinetic action, it's not a war. Now, even before this conflict started, U.S. and British-backed forces, SAS and others, CIA commandos, were on the ground in eastern Libya working with the admitted al-Qaeda-affiliated groups against Gaddafi, who tried to make deals, and did make deals, 6 years ago to give up his WMDs and make nice with the West. But none of that even matters. Let's say you love Gaddafi, hate Gaddafi. The issue is the system thinks we're so dumb that they launched this new war and had the nerve to tell us that it wasn't a war, and promised and swore there would never be a ground invasion. When you read the UN resolution, it talks about whatever force is necessary, and they've been massing troop ships with British and U.S. Marines off the coast going back into even early March. On March 2nd, more ships launched from the United States with Marines on board, saying they're ready for ground operations in Libya. And this is what's so sick about this new level of deception and how dumb the system thinks we are. They're saying it's a humanitarian force of 1,000 that's going to land and help the rebels in a humanitarian way open up roads and the seaways. And if the Libyan government gets in their way in any way, then there'll have to be a larger ground force because that evil Gaddafi dare attack the globalist military that was there helping the rebels attack them. They think the public is so stupid that if Libya fights back against bombardment from the air or ground troops giving munitions and logistics to the al-Qaeda forces attacking Gaddafi, that that is some form of terrorism. This is the new model of imperial world government, where the UN, owned by the big central banks, launches rebel forces inside Egypt. When Egypt stands up against them, the West comes in and backs the overthrow of Mubarak, their old dictator. Same thing is being done in other Middle Eastern and North African countries. And the world realizes what's happening. That's why Saudi Arabia is running away in fear to Russia and China now and slashing oil production because they understand the West has turned on them. I'm not a fan of the corrupt Saudis either. The point is, why are the globalists destabilizing the world now? And why do the globalists think we are so stupid that Obama and the UN and the rest of them swore there'd never be ground forces when they already had SAS commandos and CIA advisors on the ground from before the conflict? This is amazing. So the ground force is getting ready, and now with Orwellian-type terms, they're telling us that this itself isn't a ground invasion, just like the air bombardment was not an air war. Ladies and gentlemen, it's breaking at Infowars.com. The London Guardian's also reporting on it. The EU is moving ahead with their invasion under UN authority, and all of this to legitimize the world government. This is how the imperial system invades countries. They have their rebels attack, and if their rebels aren't successful in taking over the nation, then the air power and the ground troops are brought in. This is incredible. And you've all been lied to arrogantly the whole time. They knew that they were going to have this ground invasion and swore they'd never do it, treating us all like a bunch of idiots and trying to break our will and condition us to accept the fact that Western governments are a pack of liars. And they don't just want to enslave the Libyans or the Egyptians. Since they put in a new government in Egypt, they've banned protest entirely and have the modesty police out in force. They want to take our liberties here at home as well. This is a global corporate government that wages war against any form of human liberty. And if we don't speak out against this new war, they're going to launch more and more and more, just like the French have now invaded the Ivory Coast and overthrown the government and brought in the rebels that were hacking people up with machetes. If we don't say no to this system, the globalists are not going to stop. They are launching a takeover all over the planet, and it's very dangerous. And it marks a major escalation in the neo-imperial takeover of the planet. Well, Well, we have a completely jam-packed and vitally important transmission lined up for you today. As I said yesterday at the beginning of the broadcast, no, it's not your imagination. The news is quickening. Events are intensifying and accelerating at every level, economically, societally, culturally. And we're going to break it down today. The social engineers of the planet who are eugenicists in their own stated goals for world hegemony to then carry out forced population reduction are attempting to take control of the planet through fiat issuance of currency and credit that they create out of nothing and pay politicians and political classes off to accept and back up with military and police force. With this unlimited capital, their stated goal in every third world nation, in Europe and here in the United States, has always been, i.e. the 2002 IMF World Bank documents that got leaked, to position societies out of free market, free systems into false free market, controlled, vertically integrated, command and control, rigged, tilted playing field inside crony capitalist systems. They want you to be debtor slaves. And so, of course, Geithner says if you don't increase the debt limit, the debt ceiling, if you don't raise taxes, if you don't bring in more money, we will default. Because he was the former head of the private Federal Reserve, now the Treasury agent. The previous head of the Treasury was the former head of Goldman Sachs, shareholders in the private Federal Reserve, who positioned the tens of trillions of dollars of taxpayer money delivered to the private banks so they could shut down loans and use the money to consolidate even more power. So, of course, these Bernie Madoff, Ken Lay-type scammers want us to be bankrupt. This has always been what they want. Now, the Republicans are writing in as the saviors. But remember, they went along with the repeal of Glass-Steagall in '99, allowing the fractional reserve banking to go from 10-to-1 leveraging to nearly unlimited. They can create thousands of layers of leveraging. $1 of deposits can be leveraged out into thousands of dollars. $1 million can be leveraged into billions. Billions can be leveraged into trillions. And when you go to the Davos own website, when you watch the announcements made by the globalists in their public Bilderberg group meetings, like Davos and Bretton Woods too, they openly say the American people can take on more debt. That is prosperity. This is a debt black hole set up in 1913, set up in other countries at different times, in Europe earlier, in most third world nations later, where for every dollar or euro or yen or yuan that is created, for every peso that's created, Mexico does the same scam. They've devalued their currency and robbed their people many times. For every dollar or peso or euro that's created, a dollar or peso or euro or yuan or yen in debt is created to the private banking cartels. That's why the globalists launched the attacks on the Serbs in the 90s. Not that the Serbs were perfect. Most governments are corrupt. But the point is they were a sovereign nation with their own factories, a growing population, and they had their own government bank issuing currency and credit as a way to supercharge the economy, not a monetarist system. Had to be attacked. Same thing with Libya. Had their own bank, building up the country, using the water out of the aquifers, population exploding, building skyscrapers, building highways. Over half the graduates in college, women. Women not wearing hoods over their heads. Had to be overthrown by Al-Qaeda. Happening now. Same thing in Egypt. Now they've got the modesty police in. They've banned all protest with the globalist-run new government. Same thing in Iraq. Throw out the old CIA chief who built up the country, population more than doubled, skyscrapers, rock and roll music, 62% of college graduates women. Now they're wearing the headdresses. Now they're being taught. They're learning who Al-Qaeda is, the sword of the banking cartel. Al-Qaeda is then used to menace the United States. Then the globalists use it to crack down and take our liberties. This is the strategy. And so the Republicans coming in, all they're doing is ensuring we sign on to this fraudulent $14 trillion debt, itself a small unit of the 1.5 quadrillion, over 60% of that reportedly owed by the U.S. because the private bankers paid off our Congress to sign on to it through financial terrorism and threats of depression, October 3rd, 2008. Now Geithner's back last week and this weekend and yesterday saying you will raise the debt ceiling, you will go into deeper debt to us, the private banks that he represents, or we're going to have a depression and it's going to cause the default on the dollar. Technically, they're already monetizing over 70% of the debt. China's backing out of buying even more. The Saudis are moving away from buying it, knowing they're being double-crossed. And so we're rapidly, that's an old number of 70%. They're estimating in the Wall Street Journal will now be over 75% with the Chinese announcing they're going to cut how many T-bills they're buying even more and dump T-bills they've got. And so they're technically defaulting by hyperinflation of the dollar. And they're getting ready to scapegoat anybody who tries to tell the bankers, we don't owe you these hundreds and hundreds of trillions you've gotten us to sign on to. And a great case point example of this, and this is so central, is why I'm covering it first, not the open announcement of the ground invasion of Libya. It's already been going on for over a month and a half, but now they're just announcing it and got the troop ships and the Marines ready to land, as we told you 5 weeks ago. That's right. Before the UN resolution, we told you, U.S., British Special Forces were there. Now the State Department's admitting that. Now they're putting in more troops. It's incredible, and that's all part of this larger empire. But before I get to that, I want to continue in the rest of this segment on the banking cartel takeover. So the Democrats, they're playing the left-wing part of the New World Order fraudulent choice deception. And they are saying it's going to take Social Security. It's going to take Medicare and Medicaid. It's going to starve old people to death. It's going to kill them with no medical care if we don't raise the debt ceiling and get deeper into this unsustainable, crippling system that was built by design. And I'm going to address that in a moment in detail. The Republican leadership, except for Ron Paul, Rand Paul, and a few others, they come out and say, oh, yes, we've got to slash spending at every level so we can pay off the debt, not just some of the real debt that's small in comparison to the derivatives that our system actually owes, but the overall Ponzi scheme of the 1.5 quadrillion globally, again, over 60% of that our government signed on to. And so they're not addressing the private Federal Reserve. And Ron Paul's got a new article out today at Infowars.com where he says, all of this spending cutting, all of the discussions of it, all the budget talk means nothing if you don't get transparency and audit the Fed and shut down this system. It is a financial black hole where $1 of debt, let me explain this, is created every time a dollar is issued. So as the Federal Reserve says, okay, Treasury, we'll buy with fiat made up digits in a computer, we'll buy your 70+% of monetized T-bills, and that's how they create the debt system to issue the currency, and we'll do it by making you go more into debt to us. It's all made up, but they get our tax money and real assets. This is exactly what the banksters want, and they're on record. So they've been getting more power, using their control of issuance of currency and credit for decades to maneuver the United States from the greatest creditor nation, wealthiest nation, the most patents, 10% growth rates on average for the first 160 years of our nation, to now where we are, where we work more hours than anybody else in the world. We have the highest corporate, private, government debt, and things are just unraveling. And their answer is, oh, we do owe this debt, when the truth is the money system is designed under the private Federal Reserve to reduce you to absolute serfs, as Thomas Jefferson said 230 years ago. In fact, pull me the Thomas Jefferson quote about waking up homeless on the continent our forefathers conquered. I want to be, and same thing Andrew Jackson talked about, same thing Lincoln talked about. Lincoln wouldn't take loans from these people. He issued his own government currency, and they shot him in the head for it. This is the fight that any nation is going to face. Any free nation, or even if it's not a free nation like Libya, any sovereign nation is going to face, like Serbia. If you try to not let this offshore global corporate cartel run your life, it's over. Now, meanwhile, the Democrats are out there who help build the unsustainable system, help get rid of Glass-Steagall, know full well